with new leaders or leaders is how do you engage staff in a meaningful way, an effective way? How do you connect them? I mean, as a consultant, I talk incessantly and constantly about mission and vision of an organization. And how do you connect people to that as a midline manager or as an executive director? What are the kinds of things, is this a frustration for you? Is it a difficult thing to do to keep the vision of this organization? I'm going to refer to something that Tony, I sat on Tony's board back in the early, 30s? And one of the things that we did at the crash as board members and with Tony's help was work so hard on the vision of that organization, enough to be able to capture midline managers in that and frontline staff in working together to create a vision for the organization. And I have to tell you, Tony, when I speak to organizations and talk to them around board development or strategic planning, I go back to that because it's such a strong image for me as to how we created that vision. It was a vision that people could actually see, do, knew what it would look like when it was done, and they became very much engaged in it. Talk about a little bit with me about how do you do this, and is this a struggle for you, and how is it, as a new leader, you do this?
I don't think I have that struggle at my agency. I have a really strong CEO and a very strong vision and mission. We went through strategic planning, and the consultants actually suggested we keep exactly what we have and make no changes. The struggle is in the turnover of staff and reintroducing that vision and mission to a new breed of staff constantly in this field, and having them engage in it and believe in it if they're only going to be short-term employees. So that's the real struggle.
Ditto for board members. When new board members come on, how do they connect with that?
Yeah, for me, I think in a new organization, there's always the opportunity, and it's not often that you're involved in new organizations these days, right? That's pretty fresh because organizations don't typically develop right now. It's more amalgamations and trying to put different histories together and that kind of thing. But I think that developing a new organization and having a fresh vision and mission and trying to keep that alive within a staff really takes time. It takes time to keep refocusing staff on that piece and getting them excited about what that vision really means in terms of how they work with clients, what they do in the community, how they cover for their teammates, how they, that there's a sense of unification about the organization that that you continue to cultivate. And I think that when you bring new staff in, one of the challenges, I think, is an old staff or a staff that's had years and years that's not shifting and bringing new folks into the organization, because every time new people come in, it's a chance to talk about vision and mission again, and it's a chance to link them with people who've had some of the history in the organization, and so the whole sense of teamwork comes up again, and it keeps the organization dynamic. Now you can overdo that at one end of the continuum to when you don't have any retained competencies, which is problematic. But I think in today's generation, like I just tried, we're at the time to do our strategic planning again, and with the team I brought our old strategic plan and really trying to have conversations about that, as we have had at the team about fund development and that kind of thing. And it was interesting because one of my staff had said after, well, this took up a lot of time at this meeting, and we really only got through half the agenda. I said, yeah, but it was the most important half of the agenda. Do you know what I mean? So it's that sense of how do you create the energy and connection around the vision and still get all the work done. And it's that balance, I think, and the perception of, I think some of the younger folks coming in is very much, is that sort of, you go from this to this to this, and it's that kind of And maybe that comes from competency. I think it comes from sometimes not enough time, and I think as leaders we have to create the time and the place to have those discussions and try and quell the urgency about getting things done, to create that time and place and have some of those discussions.
Patrick introduced a whole new topic, and I hope we come back to it, with regards to managing time and keeping all the things in place, and how do you do that, and Jeanette's even having difficulty keeping her time managed, and it's just her. So, but I just want to pursue this a little bit more with you. Tammy, I'm thinking about you in terms of your team, and how do you keep them engaged in terms of the work that they do?
Well, it's interesting because as Pat was talking, I mean, and going back to the engagement question that Tony had put on the table, because it's quite interesting when you talk vision and mission, and I think going back to even something earlier, it's about philosophy. And I think there's a philosophy behind a vision and mission, and leaders and staff and everyone in the organization, be it small or large, needs to, in what they say and what they do, reflect the philosophy, as opposed to reviewing the vision and the mission. I agree that's important. It's been my experience of late that, as a new organization, we haven't yet developed our strategic plan. We've identified we need to do that. Historically, in the legacy agency where I worked here in Northumberland, we hadn't renewed or reviewed our vision, mission, and value statement in some time. Our management team previously was at a point that we were about to review it, then we went through quite a bit of change in our senior management team. We had a new executive director, didn't get to do it. And people would often say, well, we don't even have a strategic direction. And I must say, as a director of service, there were times when I thought, it's hard for me to develop a service plan that ties in with our strategic direction when we don't really have a new one. And what I really went to was, what are the philosophies that have been what Northumberland Children's Aid Society, as I've been in that organization. And the philosophy very much aligns with the mission statement and the visions and the values. So it's interesting. It's what I say and do, as opposed to reviewing the mission statement. So we have lots of new staff who, whether or not they've reviewed the vision statement or the mission statement, I'm hoping through engagement, that through conversations with myself or with their supervisors, they are understanding a philosophy of way of doing things, right? It's that, the transformation agenda in child welfare is very much in line with the values of the Children's Aid Society of Northumberland that I started at in 1991. That strength-based clinical engagement, actually spending time to talk with the families you're working with, as opposed to popping in, seeing a baby, okay, breathing, moving, everything must be fine. Which sometimes child welfare gets,
and does.
And does, is sometimes that's the vision people have of child welfare, and unfortunately sometimes that is how we manage files when you're too busy and you don't have time, and that's what you always hear about engagement, is I was too busy and I didn't have time, and there's a truth to that. So yeah, it is, but it's about the leaders in the organization being consistent, I think. At least that's how I think I'm portraying that in the new organization, until we have our strategic plan. And it's interesting because you say you don't get many chances to be part of a new organization. Through this amalgamation, it is interesting because I do get to be part of a brand new organization. And part of that organization is bringing two legacy organizations together. But our senior management team really sees this as an opportunity to develop a new organization. And it is exciting. And it's not often you get to start a job over again. Mm-hmm. And I've said this to a few people. I started as a director of service 4 years ago, and I am in a very different space now, starting as a director of service. And I get to learn from what I did then, and even at the time when I was thinking, oh my goodness, and I have a lot more confidence, and I have a lot more, I'm much more confident in what I'm going to say. I'm much clearer with my expectations, and it's not that they're me, but I think they're going to reflect the values of the new organization. So anyway, I've talked a lot, but these are a lot of things that are resonating as I was hearing it around the table. But engagement is about taking time and having conversations, and I I loathe email as much as I depend on it, and having the conversations is the important piece.
Thank you, that's very helpful. You're saying that part of your leadership growth is you're doing it.
Mhm.
You're learning by doing it and jumping in, but you're grounded in a value base that keeps you there, keeps you centered, and keeps you confident that you're okay with where you're going on it.
But taking the time to reflect, which is why I really appreciated the invitation today, and it's interesting because both Susan and Linda, you know, I through the consulting they've been doing, I've been working with them on some projects, and it's always interesting because I can think of some conversations Susan and I have had. She's been at the office, and so we've talked about what we needed to talk about, and then we just get chatting, and I've often, she'll say, oh, I'm taking your time, and you know, and as much as, you know, and then I start to think, oh, should I be wasting my time chatting? You know, and there's a small part of me that feels, oh, I should get to my next meeting. But I've said to her, you know what, I really enjoy this chatting at the end of our meetings because I find that valuable.
You're being philosophical, eh?
Exactly, and we're talking about child welfare and we're talking about leadership, but it's that because I can think of some conversations Susan and I have had. She's been at the office, and so we've talked about what we needed to talk about. And then we just get chatting. And I've often, she'll say, oh, I'm taking your time, and you know, and as much as, you know, and then I start to think, oh, should I be wasting my time chatting? You know, and there's a small part of me that feels, oh, I should get to my next meeting. But I've said to her, you know what, I really enjoy this chatting at the end of our meetings because I find that valuable.
You're being philosophical, eh?
Exactly, and we're talking about child welfare and we're talking about leadership, but it's that extra 20 minutes that's just as valuable as the meeting that we just had about the project.
Nancy, is some of this resonating with you? I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, it is, and I mean, I've written down a couple things that are rolling around in my head, and one of them, someone had said about mechanistic, you know, when we're relying on policy and procedure and you get hitched up on that. And I know as a new leader, I wasn't yet confident in really knowing what that meant for me. And I think in many ways, right, we developed a beautiful procedure manual. It's glorious, it's gorgeous, right? I refer to it all the time. We covered everything that could possibly come up in a residential setting. And what I have developed now, I think, in a much more confident way is I rely on relationship building with staff. And I think I do that pretty well. I didn't realize that that's what I should do when I was a new leader. I had no idea, didn't know about that. But one of the things that I talk to staff all the time about is our first step with clients is rapport building. You have to build good rapport to get anywhere. And I think with staff, new staff, old staff, I work really hard at building rapport with staff. And that's really important. That they get to know me, I get to know them. I'm very clear in my expectations. They know what they are. They never waver. Very consistent. And I have high expectations, and they know that. And I reflect that in everything that we do.
And it's through that relationship that you're building that. That's so critical.
Yeah, it really is. And I know that I completely overlooked that. I had no idea.
Do you fear that we're losing that? And I mean, we started the conversation around school and mechanics at school and the distance and so on, and that's been a long time going. What about in our workplace? Are we losing relationships?
I think we're losing relationships.
Do you?
I think we're relying on technology and manuals and protocols, etc., and we're not having the conversations, we're not engaging with staff, and therefore we're not reflecting the philosophy, the values, the culture of the organization.